You are watching Texas Border Watch, your eyes on the front line for all things policy, immigration, and border security. If you can't already tell from this graphic, we are going to Washington today. House Republicans have just passed what they're referring to as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Now, in that, there is $12 billion allocated for states to be reimbursed for their efforts on the border. And obviously, Texas would get a huge piece of that. It would also require DHS to create a grant program so that states could apply for some of that funding. So we are going to take you through what Texas is asking to be reimbursed, what our Texas delegation is saying, and the likelihood that this bill makes it to President Trump's desk. So first, we're going to take you through the line items. What is Texas asking for in their $11 billion request that we've been telling you about for a few months now? The biggest section of it is border wall and border barrier, grants that went to cities and counties for border security, processing criminal trespass arrests, which was a big deal, especially along the Rio Grande and places like Eagle Pass that we cover a lot, and then migrant relocation. That is $4.75 billion. The next biggest chunk is personnel costs, and that's specifically for National Guard. They were building barriers, they were turning migrants around when they crossed the river, and then doing apprehensions as well. So that's a little more than $3.5 billion. Another big chunk is for Texas state troopers. For a while, you couldn't be anywhere along the border, and it seems like there were Texas troopers everywhere. That's $2.25 billion. They were repelling and arresting. They were targeting gang members, cartel members, and potential human traffickers and human smugglers. There are a lot of other smaller items. These are all in the millions, but things like anti-gang intelligence, Operation Lone Star processing center court costs, because everyone that they apprehended was entitled to court and their due process. So those costs, game wardens patrolling up and down the Rio Grande, investigating and prosecuting vehicle theft along the border. That was a really big deal, and we've done stories about that. People would steal cars either along the border or in Texas in the United States and then drive them into Mexico to sell them. We would see a lot of stolen cars going back and forth. Also, human trafficking interdiction, human trafficking prosecution, and then carrizo cane removal. That is a very thick plant that grows a lot along the border, and you can easily kind of conceal yourself in it. So they were trying to get rid of as much of that as possible. So Governor Abbott has described this as kind of a real estate transaction between the federal government and the state of Texas. Here's what he has to say about why Texas should be reimbursed for all of these things.
We've already finished 56 miles of border wall. We have under construction another 18 miles of border wall. We've acquired and in the process of finishing the acquisition of more than 100 miles of land for more than 100 miles of more border wall. Those are real tangible real estate assets for the federal government. It's the same wall that Trump built. So it's the same specifics, same schematics, all that. And so it's turning over an asset that the Trump administration or the United States of America would have invested in. But it's more than that. For the next 4 years, for the United States of America to have a physical location, a base of operation. One is in Eagle Pass, another's in Del Rio, where the United States of America can use about 2,500 beds for, it could be military, it could be for Border Patrol, it could be for ICE agents, whatever the case may be. That is there for them to be able to use. Also, the state of Texas is offering 4,000 prison cells at no cost to the United States that they will be able to use for at least the next 4 years or longer than that if it's needed. And so there are ways in which there's valuable real estate that can be transferred ownership from the state of Texas to ownership to the United States of America. And that the value of that is close to $6 billion.
So that's Governor Abbott's argument about why we need to be reimbursed for this and why he specifically chose that $11 billion amount. Now, House lawmakers are celebrating the passage of this bill over the course of Wednesday night into Thursday, including Congressman Tony Gonzalez. So here's what he posted.
Big wins for Texas. One of the things that I've been fighting for is reimbursement for Texas. For the billions of dollars, to the tune of billions of dollars that have been spent on Biden's border crisis. That's coming home. It's leaving Washington, D.C., and it's going to get reimbursed to Texans. That's our taxpayer dollars. Big win for us there.
Gonzalez has been advocating for this for a while now, and he even got to ask DHS Secretary Kristi Noem about a potential Texas reimbursement last week.
I want to thank you for making your first official trip as secretary. You went to the border, right? You went to Del Rio in my district, and you saw it firsthand. You're not new to this as governor. You were very active along that. So on that note, I want to get your opinion on states being reimbursed for some of the fundings, particularly Texas. What are your thoughts on Texas being reimbursed for some of the funding that we've had to pay for this?
Yeah, it's been incredible, the partnership that Texas has put together with the federal government and how they stepped up so many times when the Biden administration did not secure our border. Texas filled the gap. And when I was governor, I deployed my National Guard there to facilitate and help, as well as did other governors in the country, and did what we could to get by until we had a new president that truly cared about keeping America safe. There have not been any decided decisions on reimbursing states, but I know many of the governors have asked for it, and we've appreciated their help. And so that's an ongoing conversation with every new agreement or new ask we have of states. If we're asking them to commit to the 287G program, seeing what we can do to help meet their financial needs is incredibly important. If it's asking the National Guard to step up, or even past spending that they've incurred, I know that President Trump is appreciative of the efforts and the partnerships and wants to continue those conversations.
Yeah, representing nearly half of the southern border, we've been ground zero for it. And Texas, but it's not just Texas. I mean, you mentioned your home state. Everyone has really pitched in a big way, and it's not fair. For the last 4 years, a lot of our states have been on our own and had to pay out of pocket. I think it's a great opportunity for the federal government to reimburse some of these states. I'm certainly committed to making sure Texas gets reimbursed for some of the funding we've done along the border.
Congressman Quayar is a Democrat from Laredo, so he says he has seen border activity firsthand his whole life. Now, he voted no on that spending bill, but he has told me in the past that he supports Texas being reimbursed for their efforts on the border. We got to talk about this a few weeks ago, and here's what that conversation looked like.
I think it's likely that Texas could see money back on some of these border measures.
That's always a possibility on it. But again, most of the appropriations, as I mentioned at the very beginning, appropriations are passed bipartisan. And usually, even when we're in the minority, the Democrats, we have more votes supporting the bills, appropriation bills. So that is a possibility. But again, I highly encourage the governor to work with us bipartisan. I've said this in the past. I'll be willing to work with them. I certainly want to bring more dollars back.
He describes this almost as a real estate transaction, like telling the federal government, we have this much border wall in Texas, we can sell it back to you. We have this many easements where border wall can be built. Do you see it that way, as a real estate transaction with the state of Texas and the federal government?
Well, interesting concept, but I see it first with the individual landowners, private property rights. I'm a big believer. That's why I have a problem with the federal government putting a wall, because big government comes in and takes land away. But I have to say the state, and I've talked to some landowners, I won't mention his name, but there's one landowner that has been fighting the wall, the federal wall. But then he called me up and said, hey, Henry, I just want to give you a heads up. I'm working with the state to build the fence. I said, really? Why? He says, because the state will work with us. They won't condemn and take the land. We will lease it to them long term, and then they will work with us on the design. And that is something that I have tried to do at the federal government, where I'm trying to tell the federal, hey, don't take land away, lease it, because you will find more willing participation from landowners if you don't take their land away and you give them some input.
So like we said, that spending bill has passed the House and now it moves to the Senate, where it is expected to change a little bit. And granted, there is a ton in this bill, not just the reimbursement provision. Senator John Cornin has said that he is pushing for that, though. He actually introduced a bill last week for Texas to be reimbursed for these border security measures. So here are some of his comments on that.
Governor Abbott and our state leadership initiated something called Operation Lone Star, which resulted in the apprehension of more than 500,000 illegal immigrants by Texas law enforcement. Since the start of this mission, law enforcement in Texas has arrested more than 50,000 criminals, built more than 240 miles of border barrier, and seized more than 500 million deadly doses of fentanyl. Governor Abbott has said that this effort enabled Texas to reduce illegal immigration across the state border by 87%. But these efforts were not without cost to Texas taxpayers. And recall, this is an international border, which by definition means it's a federal responsibility. But what's the state supposed to do when the federal government simply drops the ball or refuses to enforce the law? Operation Lone Star cost my state billions of dollars, and this was only necessary because the federal government simply abdicated its responsibility. Last week, I introduced legislation to fulfill Governor Abbott's request that the state be reimbursed for the more than $11 billion that the state of Texas has had to spend on border enforcement to fill the gaps left by President Biden's open border policies. My State Border Security Assistance Act will provide funds to the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security to reimburse states for actions they took after President Biden's failure to secure the border. It will reimburse states the costs of border wall construction, border surveillance, and the apprehension, detention, and prosecution of individuals who violate U.S. laws. This legislation will appropriate the funds needed to reimburse Texas, and it will sunset at the end of the Trump administration, returning any remaining money to the U.S. Treasury. While this effort is supported by the entire Republican Texas delegation, my colleague and fellow Texan, Congressman Chip Roy, a member of the Rules Committee, is taking the lead on similar legislation in the House, and I'm thankful for his partnership and his leadership in this effort.
Again, all of this has to pass through the Senate and then get President Trump's signature. So it's unclear if the reimbursement as a whole will make the final cut or if it will be $12 billion like it's proposed in the House version of the bill. One thing is clear, though, most of our Texas lawmakers do seem to be on board with that reimbursement. We'll keep you updated on how all of this unfolds, but that's it for this week's Texas Border Watch. You can read more in depth about what our lawmakers had to say over on our websites, news4sanantonio.com or foxsanantonio.com.